Hey guys, welcome to this video. And before I start getting into what this video is all about, you may have noticed that I have not actually produced a video on YouTube in quite a long time. And the reason for that is because I've actually been doing kind of a career shift from a freelance web developer into a JavaScript software engineer or software developer, kind of the same terms. But essentially, I've been working on a team to create a single SaaS product. And so I've been doing that for the last 6 months, training and learning and working in the team. And so I've learned quite a lot of different skills. Coding is obviously the majority of the time you're going to be coding, so you need to know how to code, but there's a lot more that comes with application development and a lot of soft skills and other technical skills that aren't directly coding, but you may never know you need to know. So I'm going to be going over all of the things you need to know if you want to become a JavaScript software developer. Okay, so the first thing, you need to know how to code. You need to know JavaScript. You need to know the latest JavaScript, ES6, maybe, or you should know the ES7 functions and features as well. You should know about Babel processing. You should know how to get JavaScript working to a T. But that's not what this video is going to be about. That's why it's a very small portion of this video. So you need to know JavaScript. Then you need to know a framework. That comes after the JavaScript. You know, master JavaScript, vanilla JavaScript before you learn a framework, because all these frameworks are based around the core functionalities of JavaScript. And if you know how JavaScript works in and out, you're going to be able to transition from one framework to another without a problem. They're all essentially doing the same things, just with just with nice, convenient functions and features. Okay, so you need to know a framework. For this video, I'll just be using the example of React. I use React at my work. But I know Vue as well. I know a little bit of Angular. Those are the three main JavaScript frameworks that are used in production today. And then you'll also need to know best practices. So what I mean by this is, what is the official JavaScript spacing or tabbing theory, or how should you do it? Well, I'll tell you right now, according to many different official guides, you should use 2 spaces for your indentation. So things like that, that's what you should know. You should know the best practices for working in a team, because when you have a team, you all have to work similarly. You have to know how to work together and make it very similar work so that you don't have a bunch of spaghetti code and everyone knows what's going on. So that goes into the next part, which is setting up. You need to know how to set up an application. So if you've learned your framework, you should know the basics of how to set up an application, but there's more than just doing the Create React app or the Create Vue app or whatever it is. You need to know how you should properly structure your folders, and not just a basic application. You should know how to structure a project so that it is scalable, meaning that you're not going to get lost in files and folders and think, where would that be? You should know right away, okay, that would be a component, and it's a helper component, or it's part of the component library. You should know a good, solid folder structure. Now, this changes from company to company, and this should be discussed with your team, or if you're creating a new product, then it needs to be discussed how you want to structure it. If you're coming into a team, hopefully there already is a structure that you can kind of follow along, but you should learn the very basics of where things go and how to manage folder structure. You really need to have linting. You need to know about linting, you need to know how it works, you need to know how to set it up, and you should have some preferences as well. So linting is essentially going hand in hand with the best practices. So what it does is it makes all your tab spacings the same you can set it up so when you save your file, it'll automatically sort it or organize it. It'll space everything right. It'll make sure no lines are longer than, you can set this, but I think by default it's 100 pixels wide or 100 characters wide. And so you set all your linting rules in a settings file, and then everyone gets the same linting rules in the team. That way every single person's code is formatted and structured exactly the same, and it creates a lot of unity, and it helps manage things easier. Next, and a big part of working in a team is using Git. So whether you are using Bitbucket or Gitflow or some other kind of Git service or software, you need to know how to use it. We use Bitbucket. We actually use pretty much all of the Atlassian products, they all tie in together really nicely. So along with Git, kind of goes hand in hand with Jira, which is a ticketing system. You don't need to know Jira, but you need to know, because that's something that can be learned in a day or two. And when you're on the job, it's not that big of a deal. But you need to know the concepts. So you know how a ticketing system works. You know, so you say, oh, there's an issue here, or oh, there's a bug here. This is what needs to be fixed. And if you're using like Bitbucket, you can use Git to do what are called smart commits. So whenever you want to update your code base, you say, oh, you know, Git commit, and then you put in a message. And if you're using Jira, you can put the ticket number in your message, and you can say, oh, how much time it took, and then there's other things you can do, and it'll automatically parse your commit message into Jira, and it'll calculate, oh, this ticket has been worked on for 2 weeks or however long it may be. So you need to know Git. You need to You need to know in and out of how to use it, how to push code up, how to pull code, how to branch, how to merge, how to do a rebase. There's a ton of good Git tutorials. I have a basic one on here, but there's a lot more that goes into it. So really do your homework on Git and do some practice with it as well. Okay, so next you need to know layouts. So this kind of goes hand in hand with the folder structure and best practices, but you should know how to, using your framework, create a template. So most of the time you're going to have the same layout for your application, and just the content is going to be changed. So that goes right in hand with routing as well. So for example, you might have the header and you might have the side nav, right? And this is going to be for your actual application, but maybe you have a login screen that has only a header, doesn't have a sidebar. Those are two different templates. So you need to be able to learn and know how to create these template structures so you can easily swap in and out of different templates. And then you need to know routing. So we're using React, and we use React Router 4. And so it goes hand in hand with templating, because you have your header and you have your side nav, and then you put your router set. So if the path is equal to, main application or profile, then it's going to go into your profile and it's going to load that information right in the content section. So after you know routing and how to lay everything out, the next thing you need to know is how to test your application. Testing is a super underrated skill. I wouldn't even consider it a soft skill, because it is JavaScript. If you're doing JavaScript software, using whatever code you are writing your actual code in. So you know how to write these tests. So with React, we use Jest, an enzyme adapter with it. To essentially, what you want to test for is things that could be broken in the future that you don't want to be broken in the future. So I never really understood a lot of the main concepts of why you would test, and so that really never prompted me to actually learn how to do it until I started working in a team environment. So the main reason to test is, so let's say you're developing a feature that it pulls in all of the posts you have made, right? And then it displays them in your profile. Well, you want to write tests to make sure that that function is never interrupted, that function never breaks. So you write a function that says, oh, make sure this component receives all the posts, and make sure this component posts all the posts. It actually renders it onto the screen. So you would put those two tests in there and you would save it, and considering once you get it working and it passes and everything, that gets part of your code base. And so now, whenever someone else tries to add a new feature, those tests are ran again. So you might have, you can get up to 4,000, 3,000 tests that run. And so this one test that you wrote for that one feature, if something else breaks it in the future, it'll break, and it will not let you publish your code, or it'll let you know, hey, the test failed. And then you can go back and look and say, oh, I can't do that because it was dependent on this other feature that was built before. Testing is huge. You really got to learn it. There's also, so that's unit testing. There's also integration testing. And integration testing can get tricky. To be honest, I don't do much of it. We have a separate team member doing all of those tests, but this goes kind of hand in hand with using something called Browserify, and there's a bunch of other different tools you can use to essentially make sure that all your code is working together. You may push one feature up and then it passes a test, but it for some reason doesn't work with another feature and the whole thing breaks. So that's what integration testing is for. Learn about it, learn how to use it. It actually ties into the pipeline, which we're going to get into in a second. But next on the testing is code reviews. So code reviews is huge. Essentially what this means is when you want to say, oh, I did this new feature, I pushed it up here, you have to do a code review to make sure someone else looks over it and says, oh, you forgot the semicolon here, or oh, this won't work because of that, or oh, you should actually do it this way. And this can create a lot of tension at the workplace if this is not done right. You really have to take a step back emotionally when you do these code reviews to realize that it's for the better of the company. And they're not critiquing you and your code, they're just trying to make the best of it. Okay, so code reviews, you need to have at least one person reviewing your code. So learn how to do a proper code review, how to properly look at the code and decipher it. It can get really daunting. When I first started doing it, it's so many lines of code. I mean, it depends on how much code they push up, whoever's sending you the review. But most of the time, most of that commit change that you're supposed to be reviewing, a lot of it's actually like changes in the package.json or the yarn lock file, or adding an npm package or something that's not really anything you need to look at. So it looks more daunting than it actually is. Usually there's only, like, if they do it right, up to 5 or 6 files at the max that you're looking at and looking over, making sure it all makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, you can write comments on there and say, hey, this needs to get fixed, or you can even say, like, why did you do it this way? You can have discussions within the code review. So very important. We use Bitbucket for that as well. So now you need to know how to actually deploy your application. So there's many ways to do this. The new way to do a JavaScript application is to actually separate the front end and the back end. So I work on the front end team. We have a whole separate back end team. And so our code bases are completely different, but we have to integrate within each other. We just use API calls. So our backend team basically creates a bunch of APIs, and front-end team doesn't have any backend server. We actually use S3, Amazon S3, AWS to host our static index file. So essentially all our website is an index file. The routing is done within the actual JavaScript, and so we just point our domain to the index file using S3. And anytime we want to connect to the backend, we just make an API call. So that's kind of the structure of how new age JavaScript applications are made these days. After you learn how to use S3, is probably one of the most basic and simple features of AWS. You don't have to use S3. You can use DreamHost, or you can use any hosting service, really. You can use GitHub to host your static pages. I wouldn't recommend it because you can't put any secure socket layer SSL certificate on it. So S3 is probably the best way to go, but there's DigitalOcean. You can use them as well. It really depends on the team and the whole structure of the whole project itself. So another AWS feature you should know, or a similar feature, is authentication and logging in and out of your application. Most of the time, if you are creating a software as a service application, you either have some kind of paid access or a restricted access, or maybe you have an admin center. There's a lot of different levels in an application based on who that person is that they're granted access to. So that is controlled using authentication, and with AWS, an easy way to do it is using Cognito. So what Cognito allows is to essentially create a profile. You register for a profile, and you can use Amazon's core service, just create a username and password, and you can store that in a database. Or you can use Google sign-in, or Facebook sign-in, or Twitter sign-in, or SAML sign-in. So there's a bunch of different sign-in methods that you can configure with Cognito. But essentially, what happens is you say, okay, so when this person logs in using this method, so for example, we use our Google login methods for the most of the time. We say, okay, if they logged in through Google, check the domain of the email address that was logged in. If the domain is equal to one of our domains, then it's going to give them admin access, and so that will then give them admin access within AWS, so they can access any of the stuff we allow. If they log in with a different email address, or if they don't log in at all, don't give them any access. And then at that point, you can, in your actual code, you can determine, you can say, hey, is this person authenticated for this component? If it is, load it. If not, load a different component. So that's kind of how logging in and out works. So if they try to access a page that is login only, it's going to force them to the login page. They have to log in, it goes to Amazon Cognito, it logs them in, it sends it back, and then React will send another message to Amazon saying, hey, is this user authenticated? It'll check out Cognito, say yes it is, and then you'll have access to the rest of the application. Okay, if you want to take that, if you want to take S3 to the next step, you're going to want to use CloudFront. CloudFront essentially allows you to cache your website. So S3 is where you host it. CloudFront, what it'll do is it'll take a copy of that host and it'll split it up all around the world in different cache locations called edges. So for example, if someone in Orange County, California tries to access my website that is hosted on CloudFront, it will go to the Orange County or the Southern California edge. And if anyone has loaded the website before, it'll be their cache within a day. If no one's loaded that before, then it'll make a call to the S3 bucket and it'll pull all that information into the edge. Now for the next 24 hours, whoever tries to access my website from that particular edge in Orange County is going to get the results way faster because it's cached a lot shorter distance. So that's the essentials of what CloudFront does. There's a lot more features that it does. Like you can put SSL certificates. If you want to have a domain name, a custom domain name, it's best to use CloudFront. You can use S3, but it's restricted in a way that your bucket name has to be the domain of your website. And if you want these different, which in most cases you do, you want a bunch of different buckets and maybe different websites point to different buckets, you want to use CloudFront to configure that. So then you got pipeline. So what a pipeline is essentially an automation tool. There's a lot of different softwares that claim to be a good pipeline, and there sure are a lot. The ones we use Jenkins pipeline. We also use the Bitbucket pipeline as well. So essentially what a pipeline does is it'll take your commit messages from Bitbucket or from GitHub. You basically place in a hook. So a hook will catch every time you do something. So you can set it so every time you run a commit or every time you complete a merge or a pull request, it'll actually run tests. It'll run unit tests, it'll run integration tests with Browserify or with any other services you have set up on the pipeline. And if it passes a test, then it'll do something else with that code. So for example, one pipeline we have is every Thursday, it will look at the development branch in our workflow, and it'll run all the unit tests and all the integration tests, and once it runs all that and it passes everything, then what it'll do is it'll take the code, it'll push it to the master branch, and then it'll take all the code and it'll push it to our S3 server. It'll update the server, and then what it also has to do is then it has to go to CloudFront and do what's called a cache busting. So it has to say, okay, for all the caches loaded, clear those out because there's a new update available. And that's how we do what's called continuous development or continuous integration. We're always pushing the code using a pipeline. So a pipeline is great for automating a lot of your deployment strategies and development strategies. Okay, so that's pretty much everything you need to know on JavaScript software development. There's a lot of soft skills in there. A lot of these things can be learned within a day. You can probably learn S3 and CloudFront in a day, and Cognito. These are just some of the AWS. You can learn all these things in a day. High level, you should know how they all work. Hopefully this video gave you a good high level understanding of it all. If not, let me know what you have more questions on. Let me know if you want me to do a specific video on any of these topics. I'll be glad to do so. If you like the video, subscribe for more content like this, and I'll see you guys next time.